Hello, Chubby and Coos fans. It is me, Candace. I am here for our author event tonight, and I am super excited about this event. I know that I'm always excited about events, but I'm particularly excited about this one because it's two authors that I'm a really big fan of. If you shopped at the store, you already know this. So our first author that we are celebrating today is Sarah Gailey, and Sarah is the author of a lot of books, but we here like River of Teeth and Magic for Liars and Upright Women Wanted, which was on my top 10 favorites list of 2020. So really excited about that. And Sarah's new book is called The Echo Wife, which you will get to hear a little bit of today. And Sarah will be in conversation with Grady Hendrix, who you all definitely know because we have read a lot of Grady, at least 3 of Grady's books in our book club. And so he is the author of Horror Store, My Best Friend's Exorcism, Paperbacks from Hell, We Sold Our Souls, and the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, which we actually just read in our book club this month. Like we talked about it a couple weeks ago. So I'm really excited to have both of these authors today. Welcome to Sarah and Grady. Hello.
Hi.
Hey.
And I will sort of just leave and let y'all have a conversation. I'm really excited to listen.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting us, Tubby and Coos. I'm so excited about this. And Grady, thank you for doing this event with me. You already know I am like crazy about your work, and getting to talk to you is such a treat.
No, thanks. The pleasure is mine.
So I thought that I would kick us off with a little reading to let the people know what they're getting into, if that's all right with you, from this book.
Let the people know.
The Echo Wife, which I wrote, which you can purchase from Tubby and Coos. And they will have book plates for signed copies if you want to order one of those. Not you, Grady, like the people watching this.
The people.
I know. They're all in the room with me behind my laptop. You can't see, so I'm just talking to them right now. And not to be rude. Sorry about that. Anyway, I'll start us off. I'm not going to be reading from chapter 1 of this book because I tend to get bored too fast when I do that. So I'll just give you guys the little synopsis in case you don't already know. The Echo Wife is the story of Evelyn Caldwell, a brilliant scientist who invented adult duplicative cloning, which means that I've got one Grady Hendrix in front of me, and then I go boop, and I've got another Grady Hendrix in a tube full of goo. This is the story of the year following Evelyn Caldwell's divorce from her husband, Nathan, who she discovered was having an affair with a clone of her that he created by stealing her research so that he could have a more docile, cooperative version of her. I'm going to start us off in chapter 5. After Evelyn has accepted an invitation from that clone whose name is Martine, and it's an invitation she's reluctant to accept. I'm going to get it to the right page. I can do it. Okay, there we go. The tea shop Martine had chosen was cute. It was small with mismatched furniture and clumsy velvet couches, and a hand-chalked menu behind the counter. Tea-filled jars lined the shelves behind the register. The place smelled like steam and wood polish. There was a bulletin board covered in handwritten flyers for babysitting, yoga classes, free furniture. It was almost halfway between our houses. A bell over the door announced my entrance, bright and brassy. I tried not to look for her, but I failed. And there she was. She was already seated, her hands around a steaming mug, her eyes on a book. She didn't look up, didn't notice me standing there, too engrossed in her reading. The air in the coffee shop seemed thin. My breath came too fast. I took my time at the coat rack, unwinding my scarf, shrugging out of my coat, watching the way Martine moved. It was hypnotic. She moved in ways that I didn't, in ways that I had consciously, effortfully trained myself out of, tucking in of my arms and legs, ways of making myself smaller, less obtrusive, delicate flutters that might imply indecision, little hesitations that could make my colleagues think that they had permission to doubt me. And then there were the similarities. I knew without having to think about it that I chewed my lip in that same way when I was reading a sentence that challenged my assumptions about something. I knew that I took the same care when setting a glass on a table. I knew that my chin drifted toward whatever I was paying attention to. When I went to the counter to order a tea, the server did a double take. He kept glancing up at me as he took my order. Just when I thought I might scream, he shook his head and apologized. Sorry, he said. It's just, are you here meeting someone? Yes, her. I pointed to Martine's back, anticipating the follow-up question. Are you guys twins? The server asked, pouring hot water into a mug to warm it. It's uncanny. Yes, twins. The lie was easy. Can you bring that to the table when it's ready? It'll just be another minute, he said, but I was already walking away, my skin jumping. Twins. Sure. It was stupider than anything in the world the way I caught Nathan. A cliche. I'd found a hair. It was the kind of thing that couldn't have happened if I'd remembered just a minute earlier or a minute later. I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have had a clue. I'd been on the way out the door headed to work, and I realized at the last moment that I needed a hair to demonstrate a sampling technique to some visiting grad students who would try to leave resumes on my desk. I let the lab send me a batch of them a few times a year, a show of goodwill on my part, and this was a technique I could let them see without worrying that anyone would faint. The method I was going to demonstrate would make use of old, dead tissues, and a hair was perfect for the task. Small, annoying to keep track of, difficult to manipulate. It was midsummer, so my hair was up, tucked away from my face and off my neck so it wouldn't stick to me in the humidity. But I spotted one of my loose strands on Nathan's coat as I was leaving the house, and I grabbed it, pleased to not have to go upstairs and harvest one from my hairbrush. I'd folded it into a receipt from my own pocket, a receipt for butter and Brussels sprouts and cotton swabs. And when I demonstrated the sampling technique to the wide-eyed students, I noticed that something was wrong. My sequencing results showed the trademark Syed and I used to flag specimens, a goofy line of code that, when translated, spelled out, "It's alive," our little joke. I wish I could say that I'd felt even a moment of knee-jerk denial, that any part of me had insisted it couldn't be so, but no, that would be a lie. I knew. I knew right away, like knowing the doctor has bad news to share. I remember the way my stomach dropped, the way heat flooded my throat. This is bad, I thought, and I wasn't wrong. I didn't try to pretend, I just verified. Once the students were gone, I sequenced the sample again. There was plenty of the hair left to use. I sequenced it 3 times, and the 3rd time, I showed it to Syed to check my own observation. He immediately spotted the signature line. I sat back in my chair and let out a long, slow breath. "Well, this is awkward, Syed," I said, "but I don't think this is my hair." What followed, a private investigator, an envelope full of photographs of Nathan walking into a strange house, late nights spent scrolling through his text messages and emails looking for something, anything, a name, a reason. That was less crisp in my memory. It all blurred together into a frenzy of bitter anger and determination. What stayed sharp was the confrontation. The moment when I knocked on the door of the strange house. The moment when the other woman answered the door, and the observable data confirmed my hypothesis. The moment when I was faced with a mirror image of myself, wearing a strand of pearls and a blank, welcoming smile. I sat down across from Martine without saying hello first. I repeated "never apologize" over and over again in my head. Martine looked up, smiled, closed her book without even marking the page. She tucked the book into her purse before I could see the title. "Evelyn, I'm so glad you had time for me. I know you're terribly busy." I clenched a fist under the table. Terribly busy felt like code for too involved in work to save your marriage. But that wasn't what she meant. Of course I was overreacting. But then it was Martine. Wasn't I entitled to overreact? I bit back everything I wanted to say. "Of course," I replied. "It's the least I could do." Martine rested her wrists on the edge of the table to hold her mug, not her elbows. Elbows would be rude, but wrists, those were fine. I recognized the posture, and I sat up a little straighter, felt my lips purse with distaste. She didn't seem to notice, smiling up at the server as he delivered my drink. She thanked him for me. He looked between the two of us for a moment before leaving. I took a sip. It was too hot. I took another sip, letting it scald my throat. "I wanted to ask you some things," Martine said, then looked down into her mug. "But first, I hope you'll forgive me if I step away for a moment. I got here a bit early, and my tea has just run right through me." And I was about to say that I didn't mind. I was thinking that of course I didn't mind, that Martine could get up and leave whenever she wanted, that Martine could take a running leap off a high bridge for all I cared. But before I had the chance to say anything, Martine pushed away from the table and stood, and the sight of her standing up stole my breath from my throat. Martine gave me a small smile, then walked off to the restroom, one hand smoothing her blouse over her slightly rounded belly. I finally managed a soft "oh." So that's what she wanted to talk about. That is from Chapter 5 of The Echo Wife, and you can learn more about what Martine wanted to talk about by purchasing it from Tubby and Coo's bookstore.
Excellent. And congratulations. Happy book birthday.
Thank you. I am so excited to have it out and emerged into the world. It's been in its little chrysalis for so long.
Yeah. How long is so long for you to write a book?
For the writing process was probably all told a year and a half. First draft
Ew.
was so fast. First draft was like 6 weeks. Don't, if you're watching this and you're thinking about trying that, just don't. It'll destroy you. I'm much, much older now than I'm supposed to be chronologically as a result of this book. But then all the editing stuff was about a year and a half. And let's see, I wrote that first draft in 2018. So it's been pupating for a few years now.
Pupating. That's disgusting. Well, no, congratulations on the game out. And it's a big day for cloning. Did you see the news about Elizabeth Ann?
I didn't. What's the news?
the first black-footed ferret clone, which is an endangered species, cloned from black-footed ferret tissue frozen in 1988.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations, Elizabeth Ann.
I know, she's adorable. I didn't do it. It sounds like I did. I just saw it online.
If you hadn't told me you didn't do it, I would have given you credit. You shouldn't tell people that you didn't do that.
I try to keep that stuff on the quiet. I don't want to brag. But this brings up an interesting question. So I think the term I learned when I was reading the article about her is de-extinctioning. When you sort of induce more genetic diversity into an endangered species that's sort of past that tipping point by cloning them. So where are you? Should we be de-extinctioning endangered species?
Oh, gosh. Oh, any answer I give, I feel like a week from now, I'm going to be like, oh, no, I had it totally backwards. In general, I think that conservation is great. I'm pro-nature. That's my big spicy take. But I think that we need to always exert a lot of judicious care when we meddle in the affairs of nature. Human beings, and especially white colonialist human beings, love to decide that we know what's best for nature and intervene and fix it. And a lot of times we do that totally wrong. So I don't want to say that I'm 100% in favor of this as a practice, and I don't want to say I'm opposed to it, because of course our interventions have also resulted in a lot of extinction acceleration that should not happen.
Yeah, well, it's funny, right? Like, how different is it from having a zoo? Like, like keeping animals alive past their species sell-by date. Like, I'm glad people still see giant pandas, but at the same time, like, I don't know, should there be more of them? Maybe that's a big mistake. Maybe if we hit critical mass on giant pandas, like, we'll regret it.
I think we definitely will. Pandas are actually they fascinate me so much because long time ago, pandas were really different from what they are now. They have all the stuff in them to be bears, like we think of bears, like
man-eaters.
Bears, yeah. And they were in an environment where it was like them and one other apex predator. I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was a type of leopard. And they just ended up, there were too many of them. They ate all their prey species. And then it was between the pandas and the other apex predators. And the pandas won. And then the pandas were like, there's not any more creatures for us to eat in this environment that we're in. So they became what they are now. They started eating bamboo. Part of why they function the way they do is because bamboo doesn't have all the stuff that they need to be the big raw scary bears we think of.
That's why they're so sleepy.
Yeah. So I'm like, well, are pandas really supposed to still be here? Like, is it a story of incredible flexibility that they were like, never mind, we'll eat bamboos and take naps and be super cute and fall down a lot? Or is it a sign that like that species is on its way somewhere that we're stepping in on for reasons we shouldn't be? Again, I'm being super tepid and like centrist about this because I don't know how ecology to take a firm, hard stance. But I do know that I really struggle with it when we step in and we say we're gonna get involved.
Just general hesitation about humanity doing anything.
Like maybe put us in the bunkers and keep us there.
So I'm really used to talk about that way. I'm really used to your books being in dialogue with something real. I mean, maybe that's not how you think of them, but like River of Teeth. You talk about how that came from the idea that there was a real hippo plan to bring in hippos and bring them into the States and we'll all be eating hippo meat. Magic for Beginners, I feel like, is really a book that's you engaging with Harry Potter and sort of that idea of these magical schools and holding it up to sort of deconstructing it. I feel like you really kind of like played a lot with, we're in dialogue with Westerns and Western tropes with upright women, but I didn't feel like that with Echo Wife. It doesn't feel like you're in dialogue with something specific. And I mean, I don't know if you've been cloned, but
I'll never tell.
Exactly. So like where did this come from? Like it feels very different from other books. It feels much less in dialogue with another book or another thing or history.
It's so different. And I love that you're picking up on that, because it felt totally different to do and to write. I also do like that when you said you're not sure if I've been cloned before, you're assuming that I'm the original. That's really flattering for me. That means I'm doing a good job pulling this whole thing off.
Yeah.
This book is sort of in conversation with things in real life, but in a much more abstract way. The same way that River of Teeth was in conversation with a real plan to import hippos, but also was in conversation with this idea that human beings love deciding we control nature and entire ecosystems. This book doesn't have that kind of more grounded thing it's in conversation with, but it is in conversation with kind of the whole emotional environment of the self and of especially of marriage and relationships and how we use them to define each other. This book came out of kind of the aftermath of my own divorce. I was married to a really lovely man who did not clone me, and who I am assured is still alive and himself out in the world. But when we had to go our separate ways, I found myself really unmoored, because I'd spent my whole life defining myself based on what other people needed from me and expected of me. Who did my marriage need me to be? And I was like, I'll be that person. And all of a sudden I was on my own getting to decide wholly, who do I want to be? And it forced me to grapple with where my answers to that question were coming from. I had this notion I'm going to be self-determined. I'm going to be a person where I get to decide every piece of myself all on my own. And it turns out, weirdly, it doesn't work like that. Like, you don't get to just separate yourself from everything you've been and everyone you've known, and become a wholly formed person. You still have to kind of reckon with where you've come from. And that's so present, I think, in so many relationships. We define ourselves based so much on who we are to other people. And this book is very much coming out of that. It's also deeply in conversation with community. Oh my gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? It just completely left my brain. Community complicity in abuse dynamics in relationships. One of my favorite questions that I've been getting from people since this book kind of started breathing in the world is, how would Nathan ever think that he could get away with having a clone who doesn't have her own community and identity for a life? And my answer is just like, how do you think so many people get away with that kind of thing? There's a kind of relationship that involves isolation and control that's very common in the world. And this book is so much in conversation with those dynamics. And it's such a pleasure to meet people who don't know that that exists in the world, because I always just think, wow, what a lovely life you've had.
Well, but isn't that how, I mean, just even outside the dynamic of a relationship, like of a romantic or sexual relationship, isn't how we define ourselves always in relation to other people?
I think so. I mean, it's kind of how the human animal exists. We're very social. And I think that there's a myth, especially under American capitalism, of self-determination, right? The self-made man, but apply that concept to the entire man, not just the business aspect. We love the idea that we decide who we are and that we decide how we feel and how we react to things. But in reality, a human being is I think a human being is the product of a whole life of different communities. I know I've certainly been shaped in many different ways by the different communities I've been part of and encountered. And I think that's true of everybody. But it's also hard to reckon with the idea that you haven't decided who you are and that you can't just change that because you think, I I wish I was a little different.
Well, it's weird because interesting. And I want to try to tiptoe around any spoilers. So if you sense I'm getting near them, yell. But I mean, from your excerpt, we know Martine's pregnant. And it's really interesting that she seems to be defining herself entirely in relationship to her kid. Like she's looking for a family relationship. You know what I mean? Like some kind of relationship. And there's a lot in the book about Evelyn's family. And so, is it all just families? Are they, or is that who puts their stamp on us and we're stuck with it for the rest of our lives?
Oh my goodness. I mean, as a queer person, I think that everything is found family, right? Every single thing I see, I'm like, is that about found family? I think that when we think about family, especially in like a nuclear family-oriented society, we think a lot about family of origin. And Martine is such a great use case for this because she's got 3 people who she knows. She's got Nathan, the man who created her and who made her to be solely focused on him and his needs. She's got Evelyn, the original, who she is contacting to help get her out of a big pickle. And she's got a baby who's inside of her who she doesn't know yet and who she's creating and can shape into whoever she wants to shape that baby into. And so that's I think, such a great example of family of origin, found family, and created family, right? She's got her family of origin that she pretty powerfully has to reckon with. I don't think this is a spoiler because it's on the back cover copy. Nathan winds up dead, and Martine has to reckon with that. That's her family of origin that she's dealing with. And then there's Evelyn, who is kind of a reflection of herself and everything she is, and could be a found family or could be a version of herself she rejects or embraces. And then this baby who she's trying to build the same way that I think so many of us go out into the world and try to build a new family out of our community. And some of us do that in a way, kind of like Martine is with this baby, that we hope will continue shaping us into the person we want to be, right? We seek out, like, for example, a church community that we say, okay, I'm going to start defining myself based on the needs and expectations of this church community, and that will make me into the person who I want to be. This is problematically and horribly described by toxic positivity culture as your tribe defines your vibe, which is one of the most nauseating things I've ever heard. And I heard a lot of it during the year when I was living in Portland, people who are saying, oh, well, if you feel bad inside, change who's around you. And unfortunately, that's such a delicious and enticing notion. If I just find the right people to define myself based on, then I'll like myself and I'll have a self that I can stand to be around. This is, in this book, this is the first time Martine's ever getting to even ask the question of who do I want to be around? That's when we're meeting her, is when she's abandoning the notion, I have to be around this one person. And instead she's saying, okay, who do I want to be around and who is that going to turn me into?
The tribe defines your vibe.
Isn't it awful?
Well, it's funny. It reminds me of, there were these famous psychotherapists in the 70s, husband and wife, and they were like therapists to the stars. They wrote a book called Be Your Own Best Friend. And they had the same thing, which was like, and the reason famous people like them, because their whole thing was having problems. It's probably you're surrounded by losers, so get rid of them.
That's brutal.
Yeah. And like, if you were having a problem with someone, sometimes they just intervene and call the person and like yell at them for you, even you didn't know they were doing that. And I was just looking at it today, and the book's still in print. So that's always been this. I know, but that's such a seductive idea. It's everyone else who's messed up, not me. It's nurture, not nature.
I mean, this caters so beautifully to the kind of classical narcissistic personality, in which you can't examine yourself to find the ways in which you are causing your own struggles. And the most soothing thing for that is, oh no, it's just other people. And of course, narcissism is a spectrum, right? There's not like one dome that goes over people to make them narcissistic. Everybody has a few traits that maybe are dialed up or down. And I feel like that just climbs right up out and says, this sounds tasty, when I hear, oh, it's everyone else who's the problem.
Yeah. Well, though it's interesting, right? Like narcissism has become such a modern day diagnosis. It's kind of like, I feel like maybe like a few years ago, sociopath was the really great diagnosis.
Yeah,
Like,
that
oh,
was
my
the hot
brother's
ticket.
yeah, my brother's a sociopath. He only wears a t-shirt at the table. Like everyone was a sociopath. But now it's narcissists. Like everything's like, oh, my parents are narcissists. That's why I have so many problems. It's really, I love these diagnoses and how we cycle through them.
I love seeing it in thriller literature, because you always see a couple of years after you've got the kind of diagnosis du jour that everyone is really excited about and wants to pathologize. Then you'll see all of these books come out that include like the definition of psychopath or the definition of sociopath when they're talking about the villain. And it's always like, oh, that's what we were doing a couple of years ago. Okay, so I'm looking forward to 2 years from now, all the narcissist thrillers that are cruel and pathologize people with narcissism and end up setting us back years and years in how we treat those people with kindness.
Yeah, and they'll all have titles like the narcissist girl, the girl with all the narcissism. It's always girl, narcissist
always.
Mom. But it's also, that's why I thought Echo Wife was interesting, because cloning is sort of, I mean, kind of out of the blue, but at the same time, it's also, it is the ultimate narcissism. I mean, it's like like I've always sort of thought if I met my own clone, I'd like be totally in love and like set, like I don't need other people. But there's an element where Evelyn's really repulsed by Martine. And not just, I got the impression by places she sees Martine as submissive, but passive, but also just she's grossed out by herself. I mean, am I reading too much? Am I grossed out by myself and I'm projecting it onto your lovely book?
Not at all. Also, it sounds like you have a very healthy relationship with yourself. If you're like, if I saw my clone, I'd be super happy, because if I saw my clone,
healthy?
If I saw my clone, I think I'd just start bleeding out my eyeball.
I'd be like, hubba, hubba. I know who I'm going home with tonight.
No, you're right on. You're right on. You got it. I mean, this book is very much about a woman's relationship with social expectations, right? Evelyn really grapples as a child with her parents, her mother, who is very much your model housewife, and her father, who's a very domineering, abusive, successful doctor. And she struggles with knowing that her mother wants her to be a certain kind of lady, and knowing that her father is very powerful and is modeling certain behaviors from her that will give her more power than her mother's way will. And she really grapples with this. And the result of that, as in reality with so many of us, is a feeling that you have to police yourself to keep yourself being the right kind of person. And if you slip up from that, then you are bad and you're doing wrong things that you need to reject. And then when she meets Martine, Martine is like everything she rejects about herself, everything she's always tried to erase from her identity and her behavior. And Martine seems wholly comfortable and satisfied by that. So it's like, it's this feeling of like being drawn by this, oh my gosh, this is someone who lives so differently from how I do. And she seems happy with it. And I know that can't be right. And then feeling repulsed by it, right? How can you do that? How can you live like that? As with everything I write, I'm such a broken record. This book is very queer. And Evelyn's relationship with Martine is very much the relationship I have noticed some of my friends who are struggling with their own sexuality, who like think that they're straight or that they're cisgender, the way that they struggle with me sometimes, and the way that I talk about queerness very openly. And I live a life that is structured outside of a nuclear family heteronormative model, and I'm very happy in it. And I see them having that feeling of like, how do I get that? I don't want it, but how do I get it? And that's a lot of how Evelyn struggles with Martine. And a little self-insertion on my part of how I think I'd react to my own clothes.
No. But, it's interesting because every time Martine seems happy, Evelyn gets really thrown by it. And then a few seconds later, she reminds herself, oh, that's just her programming. She was programmed to be content this way. But Evelyn's just as programmed. I mean, she's just as programmed to be the way she is. So it's really, I mean, there's an aspect to this book, which is, I found very bleak, which is kind of this idea that we're all just programmed to enjoy what we enjoy, which isn't bad on the one hand, if you know, in sort of a bigger sense, but it's a weird thing to wrap your head around, because then you start being like, well, where's my free will, man, and all that stuff.
I always try to get a good bleak tone in there.
Yeah, but there's no free will here. What the hell? You hate freedom.
I mean, free will is such a simple question to answer, right? I mean, we've got that one pretty nailed down as a society. I think we're all on the same page about it.
That we're all totally programmed by MK Ultra. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I think this book is, I mean, it's not a super happy, hopeful, uplifting book, because you see characters choosing not to grapple with that programming, choosing not to question it. Every time that Evelyn looks at Martine and thinks, well, she's just programmed to want that, it's kind of a similar thing to when I have friends who like live that suburban multi-level marketing life. And I'm like, well, you just want that because someone told you that you want that. You don't really want it. And I'm like, is that true? I mean,
yeah,
I choose my stuff as much as anyone chooses anything. They choose their stuff as much as anyone chooses anything. I should respect it. But there is also that question of like, okay, what things are we choosing to question? What things are we choosing to fully accept? There was an era of my life where I wore cardigans and I had bangs, and I like drank like teas that said that they had antioxidants in them. They didn't have antioxidants in them. That wasn't a thing. But I was like, well, this is what everyone wants from me, so this is what I'll do. And in many ways, that was me going along with the programming. And now I wear a different cardigan and I drink tea that says that it has like beneficial peptides or something in it. And I'm like, see, I'm fighting my programming.
Yeah, no, those are real. The peptides are real.
Yeah, you need
antioxidants are garbage. No, but I think also, you know, it's interesting because there is an aspect, and we might be getting too far afield here, but there is an aspect where I sometimes wonder if the general, and I don't mean specific, but general fascination and repulsion we have as a society towards trans people is this idea of, oh, your identity can actually shift on such a fundamental level, and your outward markers of identity, like these things that I think are just base level, I can't get around them, those are malleable, you know, and those are fluid. And I think that's something that really, like, there is an aspect of horror to that, and there is an aspect of kind of liberation to that I think is like, I don't know, I wonder if that plays a part in it, you know?
I think you're right on that. People who really rely on the immutability of their circumstances are very frightened by the notion that their circumstances can change at any time. I mean, this is like the earthquake fear, right? I say knocking on wood because I live in California and haven't double checked my emergency backpack in a little while. But that notion, things can change, things can shift completely, and nothing. Well, with earthquakes, bad things do happen, but like nothing bad happens. If someone says, oh, this thing that I always thought I was, I'm not. I'm actually this other thing. Or this thing that you always thought I was, I'm not that. Your perception doesn't define reality. I think you're right that people are so frightened of that.
Well, yeah, but it's all, I mean, it is scary, but it's also like, it's, you know, you've said before you're a big Clive Barker fan, right?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like that's a lot of what was it the root of Clive Barker is this idea of, okay, well, now you're a monster and that's okay. It's just another form of existence.
Yes, the acceptance of even things that frighten and repulse me aren't necessarily intrinsically bad. They're just what they are. I think this a lot, especially I live in a rural area now, and so I think about this a lot in terms of the things that live outside my home. You know, there's like yellow jackets that live outside, and they scare me and they repulse me. And I'm also like, that doesn't mean that you are bad as a thing just because I don't understand you. And I have this visceral response to you that's rooted in a lot of stuff that has nothing to do with you.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like David Cronenberg who said a virus doesn't have politics.
Yes.
It's really interesting to start wondering, that's what horror, you're not really specifically a horror writer. I feel like this is sort of as close. I haven't read all your short stories, but I feel like with long fiction is as close as you've gotten to horror. And like, isn't that like sort of fundamental to horror, which is, my identity isn't as permanent as I think it is. Don't get too comfortable.
Well, I think that, ultimately, right, that just nudges us right up to death and says, well, my identity as an alive person isn't fixed. And that's scary all by itself. My bodily integrity isn't fixed. These things could fall off anytime. And there's nothing I can do to predict or prevent that kind of thing. And I feel like for a lot of people, once you start questioning how fixed things are, it feels like all of a sudden you're jumping all the way there. You're like, wait a minute, if this isn't completely exactly what it is and set in stone, what else could happen? And really the answer is anything. Anything can happen. And that's part of what makes life so terrifying and beautiful.
Yeah, simultaneously, which is hard to wrap your head around for me. So just to ask about the world building, I'm used to your books having a pretty dense amount of world building, and this, you really push it to the background. The stuff about I couldn't read this book and make a clone. Like, I wouldn't know where to start. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm curious if there were other versions of this book where the cloning and how that happened and all the mechanics and what it means for the world around it was much more front and center.
I'm just not as interested in the science.
Science is boring.
Science is boring. Nature is bad. Like, I'm playing the hits today.
Your identity is fungible.
Down with pandas.
Yeah.
Down with pandas,
Wow.
up with trans people. That's my entire platform.
I wish they weren't mutually exclusive.
We in the world we live in kind of get to have both. But I would like it if we protected one as much as we try to protect the other. Like, come on, society.
Maybe not in zoos. Maybe not in zoos.
No. Maybe not. Although trans people can have fun at the zoo all they want. Anyway, we're getting off.
Yeah.
You want to know about out this? Yes. I write relationships, and that's what's important to me, and that's what matters to me. And so when I was writing this book, that's what I really wanted to focus on. I didn't want my reader to get really caught up in a lot of details of science that I, as a person, don't understand anyway, and lose track of the relationships and the emotional kind of grounding. And so that's where I really kept my energy, which is convenient for me as a writer because it meant I didn't have to learn a lot of science. I got to just make up science, like, completely out of thin air, and then double check to make sure I wasn't getting too close to any actual technology. I don't know how I would go about making this more scientifically dense, because I feel like I would have to kind of let go of the relationships a little bit.
Yeah, no, I was just curious if there'd been a version where you sort of tweak that up or tweak that down, but it sounds like no.
It was suggested at one point in revisions. My editor and I talked about, what if we make this a little bit more about the science? And I've learned to listen to this instinct I have inside. I have this little 14-year-old who lives inside of my id, who, when I'm working on editing a book and I come up with a way that I could edit it, if that teenager goes, ugh, then I don't do that version of the book, because I know it'll be miserable to write. And when I write things that are miserable to write, they end up being miserable to read.
Sarah Gailey, she hates science, but loves pandas, but doesn't want to preserve them from extinction. But one of the reasons I'm asking this about the world building is because there's not a throwaway, because once you write a book, nothing's throwaway. Like, we sweat over this stuff for years. But there's just a brief mention at one point that I'm fixated on in this book, where you mention the reason cloning is relatively popular, and it's to harvest organs and to have a clone of famous people in case someone wants to assassinate them. And that is the bleakest existence I can imagine, that there are labs growing people to harvest their, like, sentient people to harvest their organs, and to be like, you are Ted Cruz and you're going to walk around like Ted Cruz because someone's going to take a shot at Ted Cruz. And, like, so did that, I mean, that's like a fishhook in my brain, just that mention of what the clones are used for. Am I making too much of this? This is bleak, this is dark.
You are not making too much out of it at all. It's absolutely bleak. That's the dream. It's a very capitalist notion. I mean, in this world, the world we live in the world of the book, science is not adequately appreciated and funded unless it's going to make money for people, or we can use it to do war, right? We love science if it'll make us money or let us do war. And then every now and then we get to clone a ferret and it's like a miracle, or we get to land on Mars like we did today. And it's like, whoa, we did something that isn't necessarily about money or war. This cloning research that Evelyn's doing, it's not the ferret cloning. She wants funding so that she can do really cool, mad science. And to get that funding, she's got to make it about money or war. And what makes money? It's selling people. And that's true of the world that we live in today. It's kind of just the logical conclusion of cloning under capitalism is, okay, how can we use these people for profit? And that's how you do it.
Yeah, it's so weird to me because when I write a book, like, you live with that book for an incredibly ridiculous period of time. Like, you know what I mean? You're like stuck in it.
Oh, yeah.
And so I usually try to, like, I don't know, a lot of them I set in like my childhood because I'm obsessed. I have a disgusting nostalgia for it, or aspects of it, or like the neighborhood I grew up in, or and you've talked and written about how fantasy and spec fic often takes the violation of bodily autonomy really blithely. Like, you've mentioned before, Harry Potter, how horrifying the leg lock spell is, because, you're taking over someone's body and making it do something that, it doesn't want to do. And that's really gross when you think about it. And then you wrote a book that's like, you spent a year and a half on, where everyone in the book, every single character is completely okay with that kind of violation. I mean, dude, did that do something to your head? Like, or were you just like, it just water off a duck's back? I'm a sissy.
I mean, it's already a mess in here anyway, so there's only so much more damage you can do. I got to have an incredible talk with the absolutely brilliant Charlie Jane Anders and Annalie Newitz on their podcast, Our Opinions Are Correct, recently, about exactly this, about how casually we treat trauma and the lack of bodily autonomy in science fiction, fantasy literature. It's one of the things that I love about horror, is that horror really respects how traumatizing it is to have your bodily self compromised in any way, right? It's this kind of this like first semester philosophy student thing of like, isn't every kind of horror technically body horror because it's about having your body violated in some way? And really writing this book was a way for me to lean all my weight onto that lever of not having the characters be uncomfortable with that violation, but making the reader be uncomfortable with it. Just basically taking a whole book to say to the reader, hey, doesn't this make you feel weird? Don't you want to think about that the next time you read a book where someone makes a clone and disposes of them? Don't you want there to be some impact? And that was honestly so great for me to get to take an opportunity to be like, I'm going to write the thing that I want people to be in conversation with. I'm going to write the thing that I hope will rewrite a little piece of their brain to make them think next time they read a book like this, oh, this has impact.
Okay, so we got super dark, so I just want to sort of switch gears for a second. But I've heard you talk about your fandom for Animorphs, and I love Animorphs, and it really isn't getting lighter because Animorphs is a dark, dark series. If anyone on here doesn't know Animorphs, I don't know. Do you want to give the log line for people?
Sure. Animorphs, they are, I think they'd be called middle grade now, or maybe they're
which is so young.
Wild. It's about a group of teenagers who meet a space alien who gives them the power to absorb the genetic code of different creatures and transform into those creatures in order to participate in an intergalactic battle with these, disgusting, horrible creatures who want to change everything to be like their homeworld. And it's all about the cost of violence and the horrors of war and post-traumatic stress and how you do things you can't take back and they change you forever, and like colonialism. And it's just an incredible series. I started rereading it recently and was just blown away.
So you read it as a kid originally?
Oh yeah. I was like on it every book fair. I was so into it.
And were you like, because I'm too old. I'm like 500 years old, so I'm too old to have gotten Animorphs as a kid. But I just picked them up because the covers are so crazy looking, where they like do these horrible mutations of a picture of a kid into whatever animal, and they're really creepy. So I started reading them, and the first one was pretty dark and took some turns, and I'm like, wow, that's. And then the second one, is it the second one where Tobias turns into a hawk and he stays a hawk for too long and he can't turn back into a human? And then in like the third one, he falls in love with a female hawk and like he's gonna have sex with her, and then he's like, no, I'm a human, this is bestiality, and he freaks out and has this nervous breakdown. I'm like, what the hell are these? They're amazing. But were you aware as a kid of how insanely intense these were?
Not at all.
Yeah.
As a kid, it was like,
this is my daily life.
It's like how, I don't know if you're familiar with the ElfQuest comics.
I know them, the Wendy Peeney, right?
Yeah. And
I never read them.
I read them as a kid and I was so into them, and I revisited them as an adult and I was like, this is the horniest thing I've ever read. It's like so saturated with like sexual tension on every page. And as a little kid, I was just like, elves, fun. And I was reading Animorphs and I was like, wow, they change into animals. What animal would I turn into? And meanwhile, I'm reading about like a teenage boy grappling with the knowledge that his brother is not his brother and also was actively trying to murder his friends.
Yes.
And it's incredible. A little, I guess it's spoiler, but I mean, it's a pretty old series, so people can get with it.
And there's 48 of them.
Yeah.
Or something ridiculous.
The series doesn't end in a way that is like triumphant and satisfying. And people were upset. And K.A. Applegate basically released a statement saying, if you don't like this, hey, stop doing war. This is what war does to people. This is what war does to children. If you don't like this ending in this book, don't make it a reality. And I mean, it hits so hard and it lands brilliantly.
They're rebooting the TV series, which I'm a little bummed about. I feel like, I don't know, they're going to soften it up. But it's interesting to me, like how this stuff we absorb as kids seems very like, okay, fine. And, one of the things I realized is, I read Mario Puzo's The Godfather when I was younger, because everyone talked about the movie, but I wasn't allowed to see R-rated movies. So I read the book, and in the book, I think the whole thing where Sonny has like a penis that's like way too big.
Oh yeah.
And like who can take Sonny's schlong? And is like an 11 or 12-year-old. I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And then as an adult, someone's like, oh my God, the book is so disgusting. And they start talking about that. I'm like, I couldn't even remember it. And I went back, like this stuff just like as kids we're just like, yeah, I guess it's just normal.
I feel like it slides right off you. I read The Godfather for the first time in my teen years. And since then I reread it once a year.
Really?
Yeah, I actually just reread it in January, and I always tell
How's
people,
it hold up?
"Oh, horrible! It's a horrible book. No one should ever read it." It's a nightmare. Any problematic angle you can think of, it's there. It's in the book. And it's in many places poorly written, and also I just love it so much. But I mean, there's a huge plot line about Sonny's enormous hog and the woman who he finds who is pleased by it, and her enormous vagina, and how she has to get surgery to get her vagina smaller. Later on. It's a huge plot line. It's a main plot line.
Well, and all I can see is James Caan with an enormous penis and poor Talia Shire, I think, getting surgery on her enormous vagina.
It's a rough reality in that book. And of course, none of this is in the movies because who cares at all? It doesn't matter. You can chip it right off and it doesn't make the story worse. But the first time I read it, I was like, oh, he's got a big wiener. Okay. Oh, well, she's got a big vagina. I guess that's the thing that happens. Here we go.
Happened. Yeah.
It didn't sink in at all. I feel like these things just glance right off.
So how old were you when you read Clive Barker?
Well, the first time I ever read Clive Barker, I read The Thief of Always, which is a book he wrote for younger audiences. I read that when I was probably 8, and I was like, this whips ass. And then a little later, I read his young adult Abarat books.
Abarat.
I always forget the R and the B because the text can be read upside down, and so the B and the R look the same. I read those, and that was the horror in those is like beautiful, and I was so invested in it. And then as an adult, I was like, it's like the journey some people take with Roald Dahl, where they read his children's books, and then you go to the bookstore and you see his books on the shelves, and you're like, oh, I haven't heard of this Roald Dahl book before, and it's a collection of short stories, and you read it, and it's like a really different tone because they're for adults who maybe need to get a little help in their lives.
Need a hug.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, need to have not been part of the British Navy. And I did that with Clive Barker's short stories. I went to the store, and I think it was like half-price books, and I was like, Clive Barker has some short stories, neat. And I got the book and took it home, and I was like, uh-oh. And it was a pretty big leap. But going back and rereading The Thief of Always and Abarat, I'm like, oh no, it was always in there. Like,
yeah,
he doesn't soften things for children. He says children can handle this better than adults can. I'll give them what's really scary.
Yeah. No, yeah, I did the opposite. I read the short. We were renting a beach house, and I read that someone had left behind the books of blood, the ones with the ones with the Halloween mask covers, where they just put a flashlight with like behind the mask. And I loved them, but because I'd been reading Stephen King, I think I was like 12 maybe, and I'd been reading Stephen King, which I liked, but these were like, it felt like a grown-up was writing them. Like King, I love, but like Clive Barker has sex in his books, and people feel, I don't know, they feel more adult to me. I don't know why, but so yeah, I did the other way around. I actually haven't read any of the Abarat books, and
they're good.
And it's weird though to me because his short stories I feel like are so strong, and I'm not sure there's anything like them out there still, just sort of in a group. Like, here's 3 books of short stories. Go have your head explode. Like, I don't know. Everyone's style in their collections, you get the style, but those, like, the style just swayed so much. And then, wait, there was one other book you were a fan of as a kid I wanted to ask about. Speaking of dark, Bunnicula.
Is that too dark for this conversation? I'm worried we're going to take a turn into the
I know. How'd you come to Bunnicula? Was it like Scholastic Book Club or?
Oh, I grew up, I spent like half of my childhood being a little gremlin in the back room of an independent bookstore. And it was a children's bookstore that my mother worked at. And they were like, you need to get your sticky little fingers off of everything in the store. So they would, tuck me back in there and be like, color or something. And I would read whatever was back there, whether I was supposed to or not. And I'm sure that one day I just picked up Bunnicula and was like, great, I'm reading this. And oh my God, it's so good. It's rereading it as an adult. I was like, wow, this is like really good, even though it's clearly for young children. It's so timeless.
Yeah. Well, it's also weird because so little happens. Like the cat thinks Bunnicula is going to kill the family, and the cat freaks out. And ultimately, we don't know if Bunnicula is going to kill the family or not by the end. You know, like it's a lot of it's voice, I think, but like,
Mhm.
and that title, a good title goes a long way. Sometimes
Oh,
all
and
you
the
need.
cover. My partner actually learned to read because they picked up Bunnicula and they wanted to read the book with the vampire bunny and they couldn't read it. And so they like were hysterically crying because they couldn't read the vampire bunny book. That cover just, I mean, it doesn't get better than that. I'm lucky enough to have one of the anniversary editions, which is this beautiful like red velveteen cover that just has
Ooh.
the glowing bunny eyes and the fangs and the whiskers. And it's like, I look at it and this little kid version of me is like, I want to read that book. It looks scary. And then I love how unscary it is. Ultimately, you're like, oh no, the bunny might be a vampire. But again, nothing happens. Like nothing bad actually happens.
No, I know they're tremendous. I don't know. They're comforting and unsettling. So we just got our warning that we got to wrap up. What have I not asked you? Because I have one question I want to ask you, but it may be too dark. So is there anything I have not asked you that you're like, this guy sucks? He did not ask X.
I've been thinking that this whole time because you haven't asked me if I want one of those ferret clones you made.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're all mine. The more ferrets, the better. I also have to compliment you on your background because mine is a pile of hot garbage and yours is very elegant. So your
Thank you.
SteamYard game is tight.
Thank
StreamYard.
you for complimenting on this. I will say I've been on tenterhooks this whole time because I sewed and hung these curtains just for these events.
Sewed and
and
hung the curtain.
I am not allowed to make holes in the walls of my home that I'm renting. And, normally we all ignore that. But there was a situation with a pipe and a nail that made it very clear that I can't put holes in these walls. And so they're all hung up with like string and command strips. And I've just been like, please don't let these curtains fall on me.
Well, they look posh. I feel like I'm watching a Douglas Sirk movie. And this is like someone's living room, which just happens to have elegant dove gray curtains.
I want to know what that last question is.
The last question is, I heard you once say that you plot your books in a spreadsheet, and that level of organization horrifies me. Surely you must be saying that just to punk people.
I said it just to hurt and upset you. I did my research. No, it's the only way I can do it. I can't hold the whole story in my head. And so I've got these spreadsheets that I make where I plot everything out. I kind of like do a pretend page count plot beat where I'm like, here's exactly how long every plot beat will last. And of course that never holds true, but I use it to keep myself from getting too excited about writing one thing. And then it's like 45 pages later and I've only been describing a dog. And
so you've got the page count going, and then you've got the plot beats going magic. And do you do it by character or do you do it just one column all the way through for the plot?
One column all the way through. I plot and I write from the start of the book to the end of the book. I very rarely jump around and I really just go all the way through.
I have never, this is amazing. How long is the spreadsheet? Like, is it a lot of scrolling to get through it?
It's usually 27 to 35 cells long. So it's like 2 or 3 scrolls. I don't do big plot beats. I'll do like a couple of sentences about what needs to happen in that chapter. And if I need more detail than that, then I'll make notes in the document.
Wow. I'm really impressed. And so when you're writing the book, do you care about word count or page number? Like, oh, this has to be like 3 pages long or 5 pages long.
Oh, I always shoot for word count. I always aim for, I like to try and hit around 90,000 words-ish with my novel. The Echo Wife is a little shorter than that. I think Magic for Liars is a little longer, but that's where I aim for my first draft. And so I break down my plot beats saying, I'm going to dedicate 3,000 words to this and then 3,000 words to this. And then build or shrink from there.
It's weird, right? 3,000 words, because I try to always have chapters that hit 3,000 words. Like, it's this weird unit of writing. I don't quite understand it, but it's interesting to hear you say that 3,000 is around what you're trying to hit too.
It feels satisfying. It's long enough, I think,
Yeah.
for me to, get some emotions in there, but it's short enough that I'm always just trying to live up to the expectations Goosebumps set for me, where it's like the chapter is just long enough that you're like, I'm reading this chapter, but it's short enough that you get to the end and you're like, oh, maybe I could fit in another one.
Yeah, don't get me started on Goosebumps. I mean, because I noticed your chapter, you didn't take the lessons from Goosebumps, because otherwise every chapter would end with like Evelyn being like, I turned around and Martine's dead body was on the floor. Chapter 4, it was only my coat that I had dropped the night before.
I love that so much. I opened up the fridge and the fridge exploded. Next page, exploded with a bad smell.
Exactly. I heard pounding footsteps behind me on the sidewalk. I turned around. They were running right at me. It was a city bus.
That's how you teach children not to trust anyone.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the worst jump scares. Oh God, they drive me bananas.
It's 100% cat scares when the cat jumps out.
Spring-loaded cat.
Yeah,
exactly.
100% for a whole
Although
book.
someone introduced me to Goosebumps, the TV series, recently, and I could not be more in love. Oh my God, the fact that it's all shot in like, some ridiculous province of Canada where like, they paid those kids in like, I don't know, collectible stamps they can use to like get enough of them and they get an outdoor grill. It's
my God. Oof, bless.
Sorry, I didn't mean to trash Goosebumps. Okay, so I think we're reaching the end of our thing. So Sarah hates science. I hate Goosebumps. We
all love trans people.
We all love trans people. We're dubious on giant pandas and whether they should exist. And you should read Animorphs. I think that, and Bunnicula. I think that's the takeaways.
Yeah, I think that's all of it.
I think so too.
Oh, and read The Echo Wife.
Yes, read The Echo Wife.
Yes, after Animorphs and Bunnicula, if you still have room.
This was so entertaining, and I agree with you about Goosebumps. That was amazing because that's exactly how each chapter is, chapter to chapter of Goosebumps. And listening to y'all talk, it was so interesting to me because it sort of brought out, and this was all about The Echo Wife, but it's brought out for me the sort of similarities in theme between The Echo Wife and the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. There were a lot of, I think, similarities in what y'all were saying, and I was like, this is really interesting. In like identity, in your book, Grady, there's like an identity journey there, and in just, I don't know, a lot of the things that y'all were talking about, I was like, oh, like the horror aspects and the body horror, and I don't know, there was just like quite a few things where I was like, this is especially the identity stuff. I think there's a lot of that in your book, Grady, too. That may or may not come out to people, but came out to me, and our book club talked about that. So I was like, hey, we talked about a lot of these things. So it was just really cool to sort of like see y'all talk about that too.
Well, that's a huge compliment to me because that book whips so much ass. Comparing anything I've written to it is like, whew.
I really appreciate it. Super nice.
If y'all like horror, and y'all should read both these books. Both of these books are very good. And that is why I'm here to hawk books. So please, if you want to order the Echo Wife, or we have Grady's book too, why not? Well, you can go to chubbyandcoos.com and click place an order. And it's really just easy. Place order, and you can get these books, and I really think that you should. And I do have a cool, really quick book cover of Sarah's book. This is what it looks like. The Echo Wife. It's a really cool cover, Sarah.
It looks so good.
I'm obsessed with this cover. I've got Will Steele at Tor design this, and he's just a genius.
Yeah, it's very good and perfect, really, for what the book is. So, yes, this is The Echo Wife. Please go to our website and buy it. We will have signed book plates from Sarah. If that's something that you're interested in, and you can't have that on Amazon, or you can't get signed stuff on Amazon usually. So please buy from us or your local independent bookstore. That's also fine. So yes, thank you to Sarah and Grady so much for having this conversation. This was really great.
Oh no, it was a blast.
Thank you so much for having us.
Oh yeah, and we love you here. Our book clubs read both of your books. And Sarah, we actually just talked at length. Like, even though when we finished talking about Grady's book, we talked about your hippo book just randomly, because like everybody read it, and we're like hippos. And it anyway. So yeah, we randomly talk about both of you all the time in our book clubs and stuff. So it's just super cool to have both of you here. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and thanks to everybody for watching Now or Later. This will live on YouTube, so if you are watching later, you can still buy books. So please do that if you don't already have it. And again, thanks to everyone for watching, and we'll see y'all next time.
Bye.